of Northern Aviation Repair and Maintenance. So he's got this under control. Look, he's excited.
Hey guys, how's it going? Everybody doing good? Everybody doing good? That's good. So let's see here. Like she said, I'm David over at Northern Aviation Maintenance and Repair, LLC. I could have had the name longer, but I ran out of room on the piece of paper. So I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about prop balancing. And there's a couple of things I think it's kind of important for us to know about when it comes to prop balancing. There's a lot of folks out there that seem to think that prop balancing is something that's, it doesn't work. There's a lot of people out there that say prop balancing is worthless. There's some people that say prop balancing is awesome. And really, it's been my experience that usually if there's a problem with the prop balancing, it's usually an issue with the person who's been doing it. It's just the way it is. So I'm going to get a couple of things about prop balancing that I have done. We've been doing this for a while here. Prop balancing is, what we're covering here is dynamic prop balancing. And dynamic prop balancing is balancing the prop dynamically. Obviously, that's why it's called dynamic prop balancing. We need to make sure that you understand that there's a difference between static balance and dynamic balance. Dynamic balance is something that's actually in motion, and static balance is when the prop is just sitting there doing nothing. So the prop usually gets, it will get statically balanced by the prop shop. So you send it over to Jerry over at Dominion, and he's going to come back, and you're going to have a prop that's going to, when you sit it on a fulcrum, it's going to be well balanced. Now, the problem with that is, many of you guys are familiar with the concept of inspecting a static airplane. How many people inspect a static airplane? Hands? How many? Okay, so those of you who didn't raise your hands, I'm assuming that you guys inspect an airplane when you're doing an annual. You're inspecting an airplane in flight. Because that's what you just said. If it's dynamic, if you're inspecting an airplane dynamically, you're inspecting an airplane while it's flying through the air. And I think the previous guy had a picture, you know, of the mechanic hanging off the front, field timing a mag. You know, but the thing is we inspect airplanes statically. Okay. That's why when we go flying, we want to, it's a good idea if somebody really wants to get the airplane dialed in to go on a flight with them after you're done, because that gives you an idea of what the airplane's actually doing in flight. And when you're talking about dynamically balancing a prop, it's kind of the same sort of thing. It can be sitting there statically balanced, but when it's actually moving on the airplane, it is a completely different animal. It's a completely different animal. What we're trying to do when we're trying to do the prop balancing is we're trying to get the whole prop and engine combination to work together as a whole. So like if you were to send a crane, has anybody ever heard of like well, actually we're not covering that, we're covering prop balancing. If you have everything lined up straight and clean in your airplane as it's running, the frequency in the whole airplane is going to be clean. Now, when I say frequency, you know, I was talking to this one hippie chick, and this one hippie chick says, you know, I figured out the frequency for mosquitoes to keep them from biting me. And I'm like, yeah, right, you're crazy. But when we're talking about frequencies here, we're talking about a different kind of frequency, not pipe dreams and, you know, magic and stuff like that. We're talking quantifiable frequencies. We're talking vibrations, we're talking harmonics, we're talking that sort of thing. Now, the important part about prop balancing is when you get the prop and the engine combination to work together in unison, what'll end up happening is not only is the prop going to work well with the engine, but the prop is going to work with the engine, is going to work with the airframe. So for those of you guys out there that run otters, anybody run an otter? So if you're running an otter, I brought my otter shirt. This is a tribute to the old Ketchum days. You like that? Okay. What we found is when you actually balance the prop properly on it, you like that? Properly, okay? It reduced the wear on the horizontal stabilizer attachment points significantly. And what we found is there's a frequency, and once you get that frequency smooth all the way across, it wasn't just a function of the prop and engine, it's a function of mating the whole airplane all together. And so it's prop balancing, when done properly, is really, really good. I started picking up prop balancing here a while back, a couple years back, and the reason I did so is because the guy that I was using for years and years and years to do the prop balancing for my folks, just, stopped being effective. It just wasn't working right anymore. And so I went out and I bought myself a prop balancer, and started doing it myself. Now, I think it's kind of important for us to actually go back into the dark ages and kind of talk about the history of prop balancing too. So, used to be prop balancing was difficult. It was kind of like a little bit magic, a little bit mystery, like you're not really sure exactly what's happening. You know, back in the days when you did the track and balance with Chadwick Helmuth, you know, you had this big old huge strobe gun that was like, you know, looked like you were trying to communicate between battleships, you know what I'm saying? And you'd sit there and you'd shoot the prop, and then you'd write it down on a piece of paper, and you'd put weights down, and I started out as a helicopter mechanic, so you do the track and the balance. So the track is when you're figuring whether or not things are actually lined up, and then the balance is actually as the rotor spins around, you're wanting it balanced. So, you know, that's back in those days, they'd have like a little stick with a piece of tape on there, and you hope you didn't get too close to the prop blade and smoke that stick right into the prop rotor, okay? Now, thing is that always kind of made me a little nervous because there was so much smoke and mirrors and alchemy, and there was too much dependent on, you know, barometric pressure and how well I was sleeping that day. And so I was never really interested in doing prop balancing myself until I had a guy who just wasn't really, he wasn't putting out 100%. You follow what I'm saying? So now it started out in those days, it started out with the Chadwick, the old school Chadwick one, where this is this box, you have this big piece of paper. But nowadays we have cool stuff. Nowadays we have cool stuff that you too can be a master at prop balancing. And here today, my goal is to try to get as many of you guys to buy a prop balancing tool as possible, because I don't want to be doing all the prop balancing. Okay? So I want you guys to all go get yourself a prop balancing tool, and I'm going to try to help you guys here today to learn how to use that thing to the absolute best that you possibly can to do all kinds of things. That's my goal here today, to help you guys get out there, prop balance yourself, and see the difference. Okay? It's pretty cool. Now, when using this sort of thing, I've had customers come in and they're like, "Oh my goodness, my airplane's it's running, it's got a vibration. You know, can you balance the prop for me?" So I go and I balance the prop, and I hear him over at the strip lay the whip to it. He has this maul, balance the prop. It's pretty significant difference. You know, I did all good. It's doing pretty good. And I hear him at the strip. He lays the whip to it, and no mechanic likes to hear this. As he pulls the power off. And he starts taxing. I'm like, oh man, did I do something wrong? Maybe I'm the only person who's a little paranoid, but I think a little bit of paranoia goes a long way as a mechanic. Come on, right? Okay? Right, guys? Okay, I just want to make sure everybody's listening here, because it's important for us to kind of, you know, it helps you be a better mechanic, being a little bit more paranoid. So he pulls the power off, and I'm like, I'm waiting for him to roll up to the shop to tell me there's a leak or something like that. But instead, he comes around again, he takes off, and I get an email a little bit later. He says, "Hey, David, I just want you to know, the airplane was so smooth on takeoff, when I put the power to it, I thought something was wrong." And I was like, "So you aborted the takeoff because it was too good?" Well, now, okay, that's pretty cool. But with this little dude right here, there's a lot of other things out there that a lot of prop balancer manufacturers out there, they have a lot of cool stuff. This right here is a relatively inexpensive little prop balancer tool, and it does all the thinking for you. Almost. We're going to cover all the stuff that it won't tell you, because have you guys ever met salesmen that maybe led you down the garden path? maybe told you something was super easy and it wasn't, maybe told you a product that would actually help you, lose tens of years of your life off. And, it's like, sometimes they tell the truth, sometimes they don't. There's some things about this that don't work really, even though they give all the information, there's more to prop balancing than just plugging in the data points that they give you here. So I'm going to kind of run through my little setup that I have here that I use. You too can get one. Like I said, I want to be really super encouraging. Get out there, compete with each other. If everybody got one of these prop balancer tools, that would be great, okay? It really helps. It really actually does. So the first thing you do is you buy this. It comes with a couple of things. You'll get your strobe right here. This strobe right here, you mount it to the side of the airplane. Usually I put tape on, nothing really super fancy. And all that does is this is just your tack pickup. So you're putting a little bit of reflective tape on the back of the prop. I'm sure you guys have all seen that before, where somebody's left the reflective tape on the back of the prop, right? Try not to do that, particularly if the sun's behind you, the customer doesn't like it. So, make sure to put this on there, and every time that prop comes through, this little pickup grabs it and sees it, and it tells the prop balancer your RPM. Now, in addition to that, you also have your accelerometer. The accelerometer is clocked in a specific, you want it to go straight down into the crankshaft. You want it to go vertically if possible. And what that does is that's measuring your frequencies, okay? Now, again, I know we're talking frequencies, this mystical thing, okay? But the reality is it's picking up a vibration in the harmonics off of the crankshaft, because because of how the crankshaft is actually set up as the prop is spinning and doing all that stuff, that crankshaft is transmitting that frequency directly up there. And so that accelerometer is right there is picking it up, okay? And so what those do is those go over here, and back in the Chadwick Helmuth days, you had to have this algorithm, and you had to come up with these different guesses. This thing is super easy. All you have to do is hit auto balance, and poof, it spits out, and it says, hey, you need to put a certain amount of weight at this one particular spot, okay? One of the things it says is, before adjusting any of the weights, make sure to pull all the weights off the airplane, off the prop. Do not pull off the weights that came from the prop shop. This is a bad idea, okay? Just saying, we'll get into that here a little bit later, but that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about any kind of weights that have been put on the prop after it came back from the prop shop, okay? Now, so it goes in there, and this will actually tell you exactly what weights to put on and where it needs to go on the prop. So then you come over here, and you take your handy-dandy little scale, which is in ounces, grams. It's a super little tiny thing here. It's just a little scale, little digital scale, and you start collecting pieces of hardware to put on your screws. Now, typically, you're going to have different things. I got like little cases of screws and nuts and bolts and all that kind of good stuff. But one of the favorite ones is a good old AN970-3 washer. Why? Because most props, you screw those spinners on with 1032 screws almost all the time, okay? Now, then you stack on as many as you need on these guys here, and then you get it all squared away, and that's your temporary balance, okay? Once you get the temporary balance and you're pretty happy with where everything's at, then you go in there, and this is where it doesn't tell you. It doesn't tell you specifically how many of these weights to put on. It doesn't say where you should put it on exactly is, because sometimes it might say put this many washers on this screw and this many washers on another screw. So you're going to have to split the difference. And there's a little bit more art to balancing a prop than just science. Like there's more to it than just following what it says in the thing. So you'll get the hang of it. It's okay. It's pretty easy. It's pretty easy. Now, and then what you do is after it's all said and done, you put your weights on there, you screw it on there top. And McCauley's are nice. They've got a little ring around there. Sometimes you have to screw them into the backside of a spinner bulkhead. You've seen that before. And so you put them on there, you get it all in there, and you run it one final time, okay? Now, the goal of everything is to try to get the IPS to be, you can put it up there, you put up the IPS there. There is the IPS is the inches per second, okay? So it's the frequency of the vibration that you've got there. And 0 to 2 is good. So like if you were to pull a prop over to me and say, hey, can you check the balance of the prop? And I check the balance on the prop, and I'm like, dude, it's a 2. It's not even worth me doing anything, and have fun, okay? That's what's going to be fair. 2 to 4, 0.2 to 0.4, it's, you're probably not going to notice a huge difference, like in actual kinetic feel to a prop balance. But if you go over to the slightly rough, the 0.4 and the 0.6, you're going to know. You start going higher than that, you're really going to know, okay? But the goal here is to try to get it down to a 0.2. It's really super fun. If you were to do this, if you were to go get yourself a prop balancer, okay, and you start bouncing props, it is super fun to sit in there at 2100 RPM, and every time you run up the airplane, it gets smoother and smoother and smoother until it's nice, and you just sit there watching the instrument panels doing this at the beginning, and then it just smooths down. It's really super, super fun. Now, when we start talking about the prop balancing, though, that's the general run of the whole prop balancing. That's when somebody comes up, you hire somebody to come do your prop balancing. That's what it's going to be. They're going to run through that whole thing. Now, you can see that my whole setup here fits in this cute little carry-on case, and I've got the prop balancing stuff in here, and one thing you're always going to want to make sure you do is chalk the airplane. I'm not going to tell you why I know that, but you just make sure you chalk the airplane, because at 2100 RPM, some people don't bleed their brakes well. So anyway, what we have is like I said, there's more to balancing the prop than just going through what the salesman says. There's more than just what you're doing on there. There's so many different things out there nowadays that are not standard. If you were to get a prop balancer and you were to balance a standard airplane, you would have no problem. It's pretty much foolproof. I mean, they make it that easy, okay? But the problem is, the more we progress on things, the more normal and average and standard starts to go away, right? I mean, now we have, how many people have experienced experimental airplanes? How many people have experienced rough engines ever? Yeah, well, come on, guys. If you've worked on airplanes, you've experienced a rough engine at least once in a while, okay? So now what we see is there's different things that show up. Now, I'm going to go over a couple of the basics of what we have for things that kind of have a tendency of showing up. One of the things is propeller condition. So the actual condition of the propeller. Some propellers out there, say the owner really likes to run on gravel bars or something like that. And so by the time that prop gets to you, it looks like a serrated knife. You know what I mean? And so you go out there and you don't want to take off all the leading edge, because then what would happen? There's no propeller left, right? Come on, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Come on, right? Okay. Now, but the problem with that is when you're taking off the prop, when you're taking off those chiggers off of the leading edge of the prop, most of us, including myself, don't necessarily think about the prop balancing when you're taking those chiggers off the prop. You're thinking about, let's try to dress out dish this little nick out as smooth as we can, try to keep as much of the prop left as we possibly can, try to get it going as long as we possibly can. You're not really thinking that every time you run a file across that, you're taking a little bit more of that prop off. But are you doing the same amount on every blade? And are you sure that the guy before you did? And are you sure that the owner hasn't been filing on it? And are you sure of you're not? You follow what I'm saying? So that we have prop condition itself. So the prop condition can vary what the prop balancing does. So you could have a really good prop balance, and then after a little while, it starts to deteriorate because of dressing out the prop blades. Okay. Another thing is, and that includes minor prop strikes or major prop strikes, or major prop strikes, you have to pull the engine apart. Also, another interesting that plays a factor into the prop balancing is servicing the hub. So I don't think that I should have to say this, but I'm going to say this anyway. So if there's a Hartzell prop out there and it takes some grease, put some grease in it. It's surprising how many times that I'm like trying to balance this prop and it's just balancing super weird, and I'm like, let's just service the prop and let's just try. And so you know how the standard way to service the prop is, you're going to have your zerk, upper and lower zerk. You're going to pull the lower zerk. You're going to pump it nice and slow so we don't blow out all the seals in the prop, because that's bad. And then you put it, but you want it full. I have seen a number of times, enough times that I actually realize and I'm cognizant that this is going to happen. I've seen a surprising number of times where I've gone to put grease in the prop and I have emptied an entire tube of prop grease into the hub and nothing came out. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, is there something wrong with the prop? And then it starts coming through and it's absolutely perfect, clean grease. I'm like, oh, there was no grease in the prop. This happens. It's hard on the prop, and it makes it extremely difficult to balance a prop if you don't have the hub, because all of that grease is mass, and all of that mass is going to throw the balance off. So if you have grease in one blade and not grease in two other blades, or no grease in one blade and grease in two blades, it's going to throw everything off. So you have to be aware of that. Another thing we have to remember too is if you have particularly with two-bladed prop, if they balance the prop and then take the prop off and rotate it 180 degrees and put the prop back on, easy to do. Can't tell you how many times I've done it, but usually when I do it, I'm not thinking about prop balancing, because I would only do that to props that were clearly not balance, like a Taylorcraft, which you can balance a Taylorcraft, Taylorcraft, I'm talking about with it's just got the prop, you know what I'm saying? With a couple little weights on there, and that's all it is, the static weight. You could still balance that. With that one, you have to realize that you're putting the weights on the actual bolts. Does that make sense? So you're putting the weights on the actual bolts to actually balance the prop. So it's kind of cool. So there's some people who say, oh, you can't balance that. There's no place to mount the. Thing is if you have any mounting bolts on a prop, which all the airplanes I work on have mounting bolts for the prop, you can mount it on the bolts. It just takes a little bit more weight, because the farther you go down towards the center of the prop, the less effective your weights are going to be. Does that make sense? So the closer you go down towards the inside, you're going to have to increase your weight to actually make up for the difference in there. Because everybody knows, though, with arms, you got, it's easier to hold something here than it is way out here. When the when the propeller is spinning, it makes the same thing. So some of the other things that kind of run into situations where you're going to need to be aware once you buy a prop balancing tool and start to use it, okay, is the engine. Now, the engine itself can adjust how streamlined it is and how smooth it is because of maybe unweighted pistons, or maybe unweighted connecting rods, or those sort of things. If you have an opposed engine and you have, the cylinder's been changed and they didn't, how many guys, I'm not going to ask for hands on this one. How many of you guys actually, when you're doing a cylinder change on a number 3 cylinder, are going to pull another cylinder just to find out what the weight is to make sure that the piston's the same weight? Yeah, nobody does that. So what ends up happening is you have a slight vibration, which you may be able to get out with prop balancing, but you might not. Okay, so that's but if I think Tony Allsworth was here earlier, if you asked him, I'm sure he would tell you he weighs everything and he makes it totally flawlessly awesome. See, we've got another thing is worn crankshaft counterweights. So we recently had a customer who rolls in and says, hey, my airplane's running rough. Can you do a prop bouncing? I was like, yeah, sure, no, I'd be happy to. No problem. So we do it, and it was like, wow. He's like, man, it's really noticeable. But once I hit this certain RPM, once I hit this certain speed on the engine, it's still there. Can you check it again? So we hook up the prop bouncing tool, and I'm like, it's awesome. He's like, what do you think it is? Oh, pretty sure it's your connecting rods or your counterweights. So the counterweights being off, I mean, the counterweights, obviously, they're there to actually provide balance. That's why you have a little bit of give on them, okay? But one of the things it does is if the dowels are loose, it will create a frequency that will make things run rough. And actually, if you're ever running around and you have this weird situation where you're working on an airplane, say like it's a 206, a 520, or maybe it's a 550, I don't know, and you're sitting there and the customer is flying along and then he loses power and you look in the engine section and his alternator belt is sitting there inside the airplane. It's like, well, that's weird. Maybe whoever put on your alternator belt didn't actually tighten it up enough. And so you slap it back on there, pat yourself on the back, you did a great job, safety it, off he goes. He's happy. He gets a phone call, hey, my alternator went out again. You go to check there, and that belt is sitting there again. Well, you know what that means? That is an indicator that your counterweights the counterweight pins are worn, or the bushings on the counterweights are worn. And what that does is that creates a frequency, a harmonic dissonance in the engine, and it will actually, because of that, it'll rip that alternator belt and just fling it right off the engine. Isn't that weird? Come on, that's kind of a cool little thing. But what we also see is we see that with prop bouncing, you can isolate things like that. So like you're like, well, it's kind of running rough. If sometimes somebody might say, well, it's just the engine. Sometimes people might say, well, it's the prop. But the reality is if you've done prop bouncing, you know what it's actually going to do, so that when something weird comes up, it's actually, you can use a prop bouncing tool for troubleshooting. So then you're like, well, maybe you might want to pull a cylinder and look at one of those counterweights. Hey, if a counterweight goes south, that's, last time I checked, I think that's a recent AD actually, with those, the actual counterweight, bosses and stuff like that coming in there. Now, how would you know that was ahead of time? You could wait until the thing comes apart, or you could check it because you might have a possible problem. Another thing that'll show up periodically when you're doing your prop balancing is just weird things on the engine itself may give you a false reading or a false indication. You're saying, well, it's just not running smooth. It keeps on getting weird. Sometimes it's the loose nut behind the yoke. So just remember that, okay? And that could be a function of your mags getting fouled because you're running at a lower RPM. It could be a function of carb ice. I've seen that before too, where you're sitting here running and trying to figure out, why is my prop bouncing not working? Because your engine's not working. And so we need to make sure that when you're running up an engine, you're wanting that engine to be as clean as possible, because you'll find that a rough mag will cause the engine roughness and start making things really weird for your prop bouncing. Some other things, talking about prop shops. So prop shops, sometimes when you get a prop installed on an airplane, it's rough right out of the box. We're talking you could buy it from the factory and that prop is going to be off. I have seen fixed pitch prop where the blade angles are slightly off from each other. Factory new, right out of the box from McCully, okay? And that'll come across and it'll be rough, and the customer will be like, this is a brand new prop. Why is it running rough? Can you put a prop bouncer tool on it? Yeah, sure. But then as you're running the prop bouncer tool, if the prop is not properly statically balanced, it's just going to be rough the whole time. And you're going to have a super hard time trying to isolate and actually get it to within our 0.2 IPS, okay? So what you do for that, you call Jerry over at Dominion. You say, hey, Noah, I'm sending you a prop over here. Can you check it? And they could check your pitch angles, and they could check the static bounce, because sometimes the static bounce is off. Or sometimes, if you're not familiar with the airplane, it could be a function where somebody decided that the engine was running too rough, and so they took all of the weights off of the prop, and so now you have this prop that's no longer statically balanced. And if it's not statically balanced, there's no way you're going to be able to get it dynamically balanced. Does that make sense? So now we also have this other thing out there called experimental airplanes. I think more and more I'm starting to see a rise in experimental airplanes. Anybody else is seeing more and more experimental airplanes, or you just pretty much steer clear of that? Usually it's for creative folks. So if you're a creative guy who likes to just, make things cooler, experimental airplanes, they're the way to go. But the thing is with experimental airplanes, we have a lot of, and when I say experimental airplanes, we're also talking about experimental or barely certified propellers. I know the FAA is here, so I'll say this quietly, but sometimes you have these propellers that are actually recently certified, that they're not like, yeah, you follow what I'm saying? So now we're starting to talk about these carbon props. So the carbon blades are harder to balance than a regular metal prop, because the metal prop has enough momentum that it overcomes a lot of stuff. But with the MT props and some stuff like that, there's no momentum with those prop blades. If when in doubt, shut the engine off. It just, an MT prop, you turn your engine off, and just boop, stops. Regular, say you have a black Mac or something, you turn the prop off and it's, there you go, because there's momentum. And all those things play a factor in prop bouncing. So now when I've talked about experimental airplanes, I had this guy come up to me, hey, can you bounce the prop? Yeah, no problem. He's fresh out of build, okay? And he had a really cool, let's see, what do they call them? They got blue writing on them. They're really cool. They're composite. Can't think of what it is off the top of my head. But anyway, it's a composite blade that's, each blade is independently adjustable, okay? And you're just like, awesome. So that threw my flat rate out the window, you know what I mean? Because it's like, I was like, yeah, we flat rate them. And I'm like, whoa, bait and switch here, okay? So what ended up happening is I ended up having to balance each of the blades. I balanced the prop by adjusting the blade pitch on the prop. Now this prop had it was like I said, it was carbon fiber. It was 3-blade prop, and it had a little donut in there that was filled with sand that was supposed to try to make the vibration go away. It's like you don't even need to balance the prop. It's just awesome. That is totally not the case. You have to pull that donut thing off. You have to balance the prop, and then you can put the donut thing on. Then it'll run great. But what I found is you have to make sure every one of those blades, get a protractor out there. They have this big, huge write-up on how you're supposed to set each of these blades. You set each of these blades exactly to the angle that they're supposed to be, and then you work from there. And this is where your prop balancing, once you get your prop balance tool, this is where it starts to be a little bit more art than science, okay? So you're sitting here, you're like, okay, so this, it's telling me I need to put the weight here. So, okay, so it's going to be, and you have to think about where the weight is and how that's going to change on the actual disc of the prop. And so what you're doing is like, okay, so we'll tweak this prop angle right here, and then you find that it actually, adjusting the prop pitch is what actually helps bounce the prop. It's kind of interesting. And then you get as close as possible, okay? Then you put your little donut on, and then if you have to, you put some weights on. But that's kind of how you do it with experimental airplanes. So it's kind of interesting there. And then also, if you get your prop balancing tool, you're going to have these guys with airboats come in. That's been my experience anyway. I'm just saying. They're not really airplanes. Well, they're not airplanes at all. And you're like, why are you bringing it up here then? Because they have airplane engines in them. Have you guys seen those? They basically take all the red tag parts that we kick out, and they build up an engine, right? And they put this ridiculously huge thing, and then they like make this cage out of like gum wrappers and safety wire. No, duct tape, not safety wire. It's not that structural. And then and then the one they want you to, and when you're adjusting those props, they're big, they're huge, they're fat, and so just a little bit of movement is going to make a huge difference on those things and how they balance. And so we've had airboat guys that come in, and it's the funniest thing to have an airboat guy roll in this big old huge skiff with this big old huge fan with this, used to be an 0470, maybe it used to be an IO 520, who knows what it is, but it comes in, and here it is at the airport, and it's making this god-awful racket. Now the problem with, I'm just going to tell you a word of advice. Once you get your prop balancing tool and start to do those guys, once they find out that you can do that, make sure the engine's running right, because they are not aviation mechanics. I'm just saying. So this is that's part of what we've got going. That's kind of basically kind of what we have going on there for prop balancing. Like I said, prop balancing really is an art, but it's an art form that you guys, with just a little bit of practice, with a little bit of application, and hopefully with a little bit of these pointers from me, you too can learn how to balance a prop. And you guys also can get your little balancing tool out there, and you can realize, the more you do it, the more you'll realize that prop balancing is huge. It's huge because it makes the airplane smoother. The airplane's not fighting itself. It goes through the air smoother. It hums along. You look like a superstar because you do your normal maintenance, but this is that little extra little bit that pushes you over the edge from being just a mechanic to being the guy who made their airplane run smooth. And you know what I'm talking about. Most customers out there are more interested in having a smooth engine than anything else. You're like, there's fine, there's nothing wrong with it. There may not be anything wrong with it. But you put that little extra effort out there to balance the prop, and it's going to run super, super smooth. So get out there, buy yourself one of these. This right here is a great little system. It's put out by Dynavibe. They're great. I totally recommend it. Super light, easy to use, easy to figure out. They've got all the kind of support you need for it. And you, too, can put me out of business for doing the prop balancing. Thumbs up, everybody. That's great. Thumbs up. You guys want to do it? How many people want to get out there and try it? No? Come on. You guys can do it. Get out there, balance the props. It's going to be fun. Thank you so much for your time. Does anybody have any questions?
Does that unit support dual access or dual axis?
Yes.
Can you imagine any uses in flight? Some vibrations are not caused by the engine.
Yes, no, that's totally what it is. You're absolutely right. And I think that would be a great thing to do. You'd have to secure the strobe pickup. Yeah, you'd have to secure the strobe pickup enough to actually take airflow. But sometimes that's the way it is. And like like on an Otter, they've got that. I had a customer with an Otter that he's like, "Oh, Dave, my there's this vibration at this one airspeed." And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. It looks great. And we looked at everything. It looked awesome. Checked everything. At a certain airspeed, there was that much movement on the one strut. And we never did figure out what it is. I still have it in my shop. We pulled that strut off, looked at it, x-rayed it, totally good. But because it's moving this much, we took a totally brand new one on, totally solved the problem.
On the vibration, you're adding weight. If you're starting with a perfectly balanced propeller, then where is the source?
Where's the source of the
vibration?
Imbalance? So it's actually mating the engine with the prop. So like if you had a prop that was absolutely totally perfect, it would show that the engine was totally perfect. But if the engine is imperfect or the prop is imperfect, they need to mesh. And so sometimes you're going to have a slight vibration that the engine actually puts out. Usually that's the case. Usually there's a function of there's a slight vibration that the engine's putting out, and then the prop is is taking care of that. And some of that could even be a function of the engine mounts. That happens a lot. So like the Seaplanes West engine mount on a 185, man, smooth.
Or an engine, maybe a 6-cylinder that has 5 very low compression cylinders, and you slap one new one on because it was lower than the rest.
Yeah, and it's making everybody look bad.
Yeah, so you're going to get a vibration.
Yeah, because it's going to have more
and you
compression
compensate for that with this vibration monitor.
Yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
it would.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Price.
I'm actually not a salesman. I have no idea that this is, but they have a website, and you can pull up there. It's okay. There you go. Aircraft Spruce, 1875. Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, probably not. It applies to any engine or airframe. So when you're doing this, I know that the previous guy that I had doing the prop balancing, he would put a 337 in there for the prop balancing, but you're not making any modification. And so what you're doing is you're doing the prop balancing under your power plant rating, not your airframe and not your IA. So it's all you're doing is adding weight washers to an existing location, and the approved data for the weight location would be in the propeller overhaul maintenance logbook. So, because they actually, like for instance on McCulley, they'll have a ring, and these will mount right on there. Boom. So, anybody else? Anybody else? All right. Get out there and start bouncing props. Woo!